Oh my gosh, I almost spit my coffee out. I didn't see you there. Anyway, hey, how you doing? Video today is brought to you by Insta360, the new Ace Pro 2. It's a new camera I'm working with. It's more of an action cam. I'll be using it for lots of things, mostly YouTube stuff. I'm finally getting organized with YouTube. I'm splitting a lot of my random content, like drumming and motorcycling content that I have on this channel. I'm going to put those into their own little compartments and start new channels with those. Because this channel's been around for, 18 years, maybe? I think it's going on 18 years. And it's just a mashup of so many different things. I don't even have 1,000 subscribers, and part of the reason for that is that it's not focused enough. So I'm going to stay on track with this video, and I'll give you updates if you want that for my other channels. But I'm going to kind of keep doing what this channel was always intended to do, have it be more philosophy focused and personality systems. Might split off and do an astrology channel. Might do that. But as I'll describe in this video, philosophy and astrology aren't that easy to divorce from one another once you really look at those disciplines as sub-disciplines of mysticism. Okay? That's what I'm talking about today. But in particular, why Plotinus is the greatest Western metaphysician. So, a metaphysician being a philosopher who writes, speaks, talks about metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of what exists. What is reality is the fundamental question in metaphysics. So, it's a very important topic. And it's not one that you can separate from the other topics in philosophy. Every philosopher, whether they're aware of it or not, is locked into some metaphysical theory of reality. They have some underlying idea about what reality is, and that sets the groundwork for all of the rest of their philosophy to grow. Okay, so you have to have a metaphysical theory if you're a serious thinker. It's a fundamental question that you have to think about. Now, the problem with academic philosophy is that more often than not, academic philosophers don't see metaphysics itself as being any more important than any other topic in philosophy. And then the slippery slope that causes is that you get all these fake subjects like ethnic and gender studies that creep into philosophical curriculum and infect it, and in fact don't take the fundamentals of what we should be focusing on in philosophy and critical thinking seriously. Okay? So there's no talk about metaphysics. There's no talk about philosophy of science. There's no talk about epistemology, all the branches of philosophy that come from metaphysics, which is all of them, by the way. So I'd like to make a case here, not a super technical case, but sort of an overarching perspective-based case that Plotinus is the greatest Western metaphysician. And the main reason that I say that is because of this sort of holistic approach that he took to philosophy. So I'll use another book as an example to demonstrate that. So this is a pretty good book, The Mystics by Andrew Harvey. It's not really a book that Andrew Harvey wrote, although he did write the introduction to each of the chapters and the subsections. And so it's just a collection of works from all of the great wisdom traditions from history. So I like how it's organized, because it's organized in terms of religious traditions, right? So there's a section on Christianity, a section on Islam, a section on Judaism, section on Hinduism, Buddhism, okay, etc. And I think he very intelligently chose selections from each of those traditions, which, from a metaphysical standpoint, encapsulate the essence of that tradition. So, for example, in Islam, Rumi was probably the most common writer. Several of Rumi's selections are in this book, in the section on Islam. On Hinduism, the Upanishads, which are the oldest philosophical writings in Hinduism, and really some of the best work in Hinduism from a philosophical, intellectual standpoint. So you get to the Greek philosophers. Let me see where it is. Ancient Greece. There's a section on ancient Greece. So the classics, as we like to call them in Western philosophy, right? Starting with the pre-Socratics, and then Socrates, and then Plato, and then Aristotle, and then a few guys who followed from them who we don't talk about as much, but you also have the Stoics in the Roman period, who are important in their own right. But when it comes to ancient Greece, well, who shines in this book? All right, let's see. Hymn to Gaia. Hippolytus, Aristotle, Plato. Empedocles, Plato again, Plato. Who else? Okay, now it begins. Plotinus, 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 Marcus Aurelius. One Stoic entry, but most of the entries selected, not to represent Greek philosophy, mind you, but to represent mysticism from the ancient Greek tradition. This guy, Plotinus. So he was a post-Platonist. We could call him maybe the first Neoplatonist in a way. Had a theory of metaphysics that was aligned with many of the other mystical traditions that are present in this book, and which would be considered the best ones. Okay. So one of the Buddhist writers in this book is Huang Po. And interestingly enough, Huang Po and Plotinus sit right next to each other in my alphabetical library of books. Coincidence? Maybe. But Huang Po was a Zen master from Tibet, and Plotinus was a Western guy from Greece. And Plotinus's student, Porphyry, was also an astrologer and came up with a really solid way to lay out the houses, a house system in astrology, a way of mapping out birth charts. And it's called the Porphyry house system. And that's actually the one that I use because it makes the most sense to me for the purposes of astrology that I use it for. So what I'm getting at is not a lot of technical philosophical, intellectual jargon. But I'm making the case that Plotinus was the greatest Western metaphysician because he was more than just a philosopher, even more so, arguably, than Plato himself. He was a mystic. And mystics are primarily concerned with what is true, what is good. Sure, mic's working. What's true and good, and what wisdom is worth passing down over time, from generation to generation, from millennia to millennia, because it's true, right? Academic philosophy doesn't do that. It's a rung beneath, rung or two, maybe more, beneath mysticism per se. While all philosophers are academics, not all mystics are academics, right? What makes a good philosopher is someone who's intellectually disciplined and who can see the bigger picture behind the individual parts. But not all philosophers of the past have been mystics. In fact, very few of them. I would say just as small a percentage of philosophers have been mystics than musicians and comedians and engineers and attorneys and doctors. You know, a mystic is someone who's interested in truth and who takes it seriously. So all mystics, i.e., everyone whose writings are present in this book, has metaphysics as a central concern in their philosophy. In fact, it is the thing that they speak and talk and write about. What exists? What is reality? Well, it's that question that allows us to have more subjective questions about, well, where do I fit in? What are my gifts and talents? Okay? How am I meant to serve the world, to serve others, to live a good life? We have to presuppose a certain metaphysical reality before we are entitled to exploring that question of self. Okay, so in order to know yourself, you have to think outside of yourself a bit. Plotinus gave, in his Enneads, this is the essential Plotinus, so it contains most of the Ennead writings, and then some other little speeches that were recorded. So I recommend this one as much as I recommend his original work, the Enneads, which are really written in a style that I enjoy, aphorisms, right? Just like great Stoic writings, like Wittgenstein, like Nietzsche, you know. I'm not saying Nietzsche's quite on the level of those other guys that I just mentioned, but, you know, Zen writing, Huang Po, aphorisms. Okay. This book, I recommend this one, aphorisms. Okay. Mysticism is about wisdom. It's about truth. Timeless, spaceless, free of being affected by any and all conditions, truth. That's what mysticism is about. Okay? So you might think you're a philosopher, but actually you're a mystic, right? I went to school for philosophy. I went as far as doing a master's degree. And my teacher, Roger Scruton, who is one of the greatest conservative philosophers of the last century, probably the greatest, was more than just a philosopher because he was interested in truth and goodness and beauty. He was a mystic. That's why I chose to study under him. He was more than just an academic, and what I gained there wasn't strictly about credentials. It wasn't about accolades. It wasn't about prestige even, although my my program would be considered quite prestigious. But in any case, enough about me. Plotinus, whereas all other Western philosophers have a theory of metaphysics, read Plotinus, and you'll discover that that question is undoubtedly the center of all of his writing. And he attacked it head on. Can't call yourself a mystic unless you're doing that. Arguably, can't even really call yourself a philosopher. The name philosopher is redundant if you're not orienting all of that intellect of yours toward true north. These are my book recommendations today. All right. Have a good day. Cheers.